usually when we talk about computer programming, there's this fundamental expectation of absolute literalism.
Right, yeah. It's deterministic.
Exactly. Like you type a specific line of code into the terminal and the processor just executes it exactly as written. The software runs. It's clean. You press a button. A specific action happens on the screen. It's all built on this solid foundation of inputs and guaranteed outputs.
And I think we find that comforting.
Right.
You know, that there's a certain psychological safety in the idea that complex systems, even these incredibly dense, multifaceted networks, are ultimately built on rational, predictable rules.
Yeah.
If A, then B, it's safe.
Right. But then you step into the world of human consciousness, specifically cognitive neuroscience and, well, clinical hypnosis. And suddenly that keyboard isn't typing on a screen anymore.
No, definitely not.
We are looking at a landscape where the human brain, which is, the single most complex organic machine in the known universe, is being actively manipulated. It's being programmed and structurally altered just by using specific patterns of spoken words.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And today, we're looking at the exact biological mechanism of how that happens.
I mean, it is the literal definition of hacking the human operating system. Only the code we're talking about doesn't use Python or C++ not.
Right.
It uses metabolic fatigue. It uses cognitive dissonance. It uses these linguistic paradoxes that are explicitly designed to systematically bypass the brain's security systems.
So if your only exposure to hypnosis is the historical pop culture cliche, the swinging pocket watches, the creepy stage magic, those old 19th century ideas of animal magnetism, I need you to take all of that and just throw it out the window right now.
Please do.
Because our mission for this deep dive is to synthesize the neurocognitive mechanics behind advanced induction techniques. We aren't just going to talk about what happens during a trance. We're going to completely deconstruct the physiological why.
Yeah, we want to peel back the curtain on the literal neurobiology of altered states.
Right. Like, how do specific words physically exhaust the brain? How do engineered compliance loops manipulate your working memory?
Which is fascinating.
And perhaps most terrifying, honestly, and fascinating. How do these techniques literally disconnect the neural network responsible for your sense of ego?
That's the really heavy stuff.
It is. So to do this, we are drawing on two incredible sources today for you. First, we have a comprehensive practitioner-level manual on guided meditation and clinical hypnosis.
Right, which gives us the historical evolution, the phenomenological map, and the exact clinical scripts that practitioners use out in the field.
Exactly. But we're pairing that manual with an advanced, highly critical research evaluation plan.
Yeah, this second document is essentially a massive scientific audit.
I love it.
It takes all those esoteric practices and scripts from the clinical manual and demands to know how they actually work at a cellular and neurochemical level.
It provides the neuroanatomical compass, really, the exact brain regions and neurotransmitters driving the experiences the manual describes.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we can explore how an induction physically alters your brain, we first need to define what this altered state actually is.
Yeah, we have to set the baseline.
Right, and to do that, we have to move past a psychological debate that tore the academic community apart for, over a century.
Oh, yeah. The academic study of hypnosis was deeply fractured by what became known as the state versus non-state debate.
Which sounds a bit dry.
It sounds like a petty academic squabble, for sure. But it actually gets to the very core of what human consciousness is and, whether we can artificially partition it.
So let's lay out the two sides, because understanding this argument is crucial to understanding the modern brain scans we're going to get into later.
Definitely.
On one side, you have the state theories. This was championed by heavyweights like Ernest Hilgard and his neo-dissociation theory back in the 1970s.
Yep, the 70s.
And the state theorists argue that trance is a highly unique, physiologically altered state of consciousness. They believed that an induction creates a literal division, a dissociation in your executive control systems.
Right. Hilgard hypothesized an amnesic barrier.
Amnesic barrier.
Yeah, he believed this invisible psychological wall separates your conscious awareness from the parts of your brain that are actually executing the hypnotist's suggestions.
Wow.
He even developed this concept of the hidden observer, which is just wild to think about.
Wait, the hidden observer?
Yeah, so he did these experiments where a hypnotized person would be experiencing profound pain relief, analgesia.
Okay.
Their contric mind felt absolutely no pain when subjected to something like ice water.
Oh, the classic cold pressor test, right? When they put
Yeah.
their arm in freezing water for way longer than a normal person could tolerate, and they look completely relaxed.
Exactly that test. But Hilgard found that if he used a specific clinical cue to access a dissociated part of their mind, this so-called hidden observer, that hidden part could still report the true underlying pain signals.
That is crazy.
It strongly suggested a literal splitting of mental processing. The brain was feeling the pain, but the conscious self was entirely walled off from it.
Wow. But then on the other side of the aisle, you have the non-state theories. These are the socio-cognitive models pushed by researchers like Nicholas Spanos and Irving Kirsch in the 80s and 90s.
Yes.
And they looked at Hilgard's hidden observer and all this talk of altered states and basically said, no, there is no special magical trance state. This is just really intense role-playing.
Yeah, they argued that hypnosis is entirely a product of normal psychological variables: expectancy, belief, social compliance.
Just acting, basically.
Spanos believed that subjects were actively engaging in what he called imaginative involvement. They weren't in a neurological trance. They were just interpreting suggestions based on their cultural understanding of how a hypnotized person is supposed to behave.
Like how they think they should act in a clinical or stage setting.
Exactly.
It's almost like the placebo effect on steroids.
Yeah.
I know Kirsch called it response expectancy theory.
Right.
The logic goes, if you believe your arm is going to feel heavy because a person in a white coat told you it will, your brain generates the sensation of heaviness purely based on that intense expectation. You aren't in a trance. You're just highly motivated, highly imaginative, and deeply compliant to authority.
But the critical research plan we're looking at points out a massive, glaring flaw in that non-state argument.
Yeah, which is?
If hypnosis is merely role enactment, how do you explain a patient undergoing major abdominal surgery without chemical anesthesia feeling absolutely no surgical shock?
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I mean, you might be able to role-play a heavy arm, but you cannot consciously role-play your way out of your central nervous system going into shock when a scalpel cuts into you.
That is a very good point. You can't fake vital signs crashing.
No, you can't.
And more importantly, how do you explain the specific involuntary neuroelectrical signatures that we can now observe in a functional MRI scanner?
Exactly. You can't just decide to change the blood flow in your deep brain structures because you want to please a researcher.
Right. Which brings us to the absolute mic drop on this century-old debate.
Yes, it really is.
David Spiegel's functional mapping research at Stanford University. He took highly hypnotizable individuals, put them into fMRI machines, induced a trance, and definitively proved that hypnosis is a distinct neurological state. It is not just compliance.
Spiegel's findings are a watershed moment for cognitive neuroscience. He didn't just find general relaxation like you might see in someone taking a nap or just breathing deeply.
Right, it wasn't just sleep.
No, he found 3 distinct, real-time functional changes in brain network connectivity that occur strictly during hypnosis.
Okay, let's break those 3 structural shifts down because this is the foundational architecture of literally everything we are going to talk about today.
It's the core map.
This is the physiological what. Before we get to the how, what is the first hallmark shift?
The first major shift is a massive downregulation of activity in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, often abbreviated as the DACC.
The GACC.
Yeah. This specific region is a critical node in what neuroscientists call the brain's salience network.
The salience network. I always think of that as the brain's radar system. Is that an accurate way to visualize it?
That is a perfect analogy, actually. The salience network is constantly, tirelessly scanning your environment.
Okay.
It is deciding which stimuli deserve your conscious attention, detecting potential threats, and generating contextual anxiety to keep you safe.
Right, so if you're sitting in a quiet room and you hear a sudden loud noise and jump, that's your salience network, prioritizing that sound over whatever you were just thinking about.
Exactly. During a deep hypnotic induction, the fMRI shows the activity in the DACC just plummeting. The radar effectively shuts down.
So the threat detection system goes completely offline. That correlates perfectly with the profound absorption we see in trance, right?
Yes.
The subject stops worrying about external distractors. They don't care about the hum of the air conditioner. They don't care if someone walks into the room, and they lock completely onto the clinician's voice.
Yeah.
They're deeply, deeply immersed.
The outside world ceases to be salient. Then we look at the second functional shift, which involves the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the DLPFC, and the insula.
Okay, the DLPFC, that's our executive control center, right? Like the CEO of the brain. It handles logic, rational decision-making, planning, and cognitive processing.
Exactly. And the insula, which sits deeper in the brain, is an integration center. It processes interoception,
Interoception.
which is your perception of internal bodily sensations, like your heartbeat or your digestion. But it's also heavily involved in pain processing and emotional regulation.
Oh.
What Spiegel found is that during hypnosis, there is a massive increase in functional connectivity between the CEO and the DLPFC and the sensation headquarters in the insula.
So the executive control center establishes a hyper-connected direct hotline to the body.
Yes.
That creates profound top-down somatic control, meaning the rational brain can literally dictate what the physical body feels, completely bypassing normal physical reality.
Right.
This completely explains the surgical analgesia we were talking about earlier.
It does. When a scalpel cuts into the skin, the peripheral nerves still fire, and the raw pain signal still travels up the spinal cord. It reaches the brain.
So the pain is there.
But the CEO in the prefrontal cortex uses this new supercharged hotline to the insula to effectively intercept that signal and say, we are recategorizing this. We are not processing this sensory data as suffering. It is just pressure or maybe coolness.
Wow. It severs the emotional distress from the raw physical sensation. The signal is there, but the suffering is deleted.
Exactly.
That is staggering. But the third shift is the one that really blows my mind. The decoupling of the default mode network.
Oh, out of all the findings, this is the most critical shift for understanding how the mind can actually be reprogrammed.
Tell me about the DMN.
The default mode network, or DMN, specifically areas like the posterior cingulate cortex and the medial prefrontal cortex, is highly active when you are engaged in self-referential thinking.
Like mind wandering.
Mind wandering, worrying about a mistake you made yesterday, stressing about a presentation tomorrow, engaging in moral judgment about yourself.
It's the narrator.
Yes.
The voice in your head that constantly tells you who you are, what you like, what you hate, and most importantly, what your limitations are.
Right.
The DMN is essentially the neurological seat of your ego.
And Spiegel's fMRI data clearly shows that during hypnosis, the executive control network completely disconnects from the DMN. The functional connectivity just drops away. They decouple.
I picture the DMN like the brain's internal IT firewall.
That's a great way to put it.
Under normal waking conditions, it protects your core identity and your deeply held beliefs by rejecting anything that contradicts them.
Mm-hmm.
If a therapist says, you are a confident person who doesn't need to smoke, your DMN firewall scans that, says, no, our historical data says we are an anxious smoker, and it rejects the suggestion.
Right, it throws an error code.
But hypnosis temporarily unplugs that firewall.
Oh.
It takes the ego completely offline, so new therapeutic software can be installed without the system automatically rejecting it.
Exactly.
Without that DMN interference, you don't have the cognitive friction or the self-doubt that usually stops you from changing your behavior.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, when you look at the totality of that fMRI data, it fundamentally resolves the century-old debate.
Yeah.
The state theorists were absolutely right. There is a distinct, measurable neurobiological dissociation, a physical decoupling of networks. It is a biological state.
Logic.
However, modern clinical practice actually validates the non-state theorists as well. Practitioners use social compliance, expectations, and role-playing to guide the patient into that biological state.
I see.
They use the psychology of expectancy as the vehicle to reach the physiology of trance.
Okay, so now we understand the target. The goal of any hypnotist is to shut down the radar in the DACC, establish that brain-body hotline to the insula, and unplug the ego's firewall by decoupling the DMN.
That is the anatomical definition of trance.
That is the anatomy.
Yeah.
But the massive practical question for you, the listener, is how?
Right. How do you do it?
How does a practitioner sitting in a chair across from you force your brain to do all of that? How do you engineer that state on command, sometimes in a matter of minutes?
To understand the mechanics of that, we have to look at rapid inductions. Specifically, the source manual details the Dave Elman Induction, which is just a masterclass in hijacking the nervous system.
Dave Elman is such a fascinating historical figure in this space. He was operating in the mid-20th century.
Yep.
At the time, if you went to a hypnotherapist, they were likely using these long, drawn-out, progressive muscle relaxation scripts. You know, relax your toes, now relax your ankles, now relax your calves. It could take 20 or 30 minutes just to put someone into a light trance.
It was incredibly slow.
But Elman, who actually had a background in radio, rapid-fire pacing, and stage performance before moving into medical hypnosis, developed a highly structured induction. He could achieve profound medical-grade somnambulism in under 4 minutes.
4 minutes. He essentially built a rapid-fire sequence of interlocking compliance loops.
Compliance loops.
Yeah. When you read the script, it sounds like he is just telling the subject to relax. But the critical audit of his method frames it very differently. It is not a relaxation technique. It is a systematic, aggressive dismantling of the executive function.
Let's walk through the exact steps of the Elman induction, because when you look at the neurobiology hidden beneath the words, it's absolute genius.
It really is.
It starts with a physical test eyelid catalepsy.
In step 1, the practitioner asks the subject to take a deep breath, close their eyes, and relax all the tiny muscles around their eyes to the point that those muscles simply will not work.
Okay.
And then, while holding on to that profound state of relaxation, the subject is told to physically test their eyes to make sure they remain closed.
It sounds like an impossible paradox. Try to open your eyes, but relax them so much that you can't.
It is a deliberate therapeutic double bind.
A double bind.
The practitioner is asking the conscious mind, the prefrontal cortex, to actively try to execute a specific motor function opening the eyelids.
Right.
But simultaneously, they are giving a subconscious directive to maintain a state of muscular relaxation so deep that opening the eyes is physically impossible.
So what is actually happening in the brain when I sit there trying to pull my eyelids open, but they feel like they're literally glued shut?
The brain encounters massive cognitive dissonance.
Right.
It is deliberately failing a simple, everyday motor task.
Which is weird for the brain.
Very weird. To resolve this psychological discomfort and the confusion of why can't I open my eyes, the brain essentially concedes defeat.
It just gives up.
It accepts the underlying premise that the hypnotist is now in control of the physical body. It voluntarily hands over the keys to the executive function. This localized catalepsy, the eyelids locking down, bypasses all initial skepticism because the subject thinks, wow, I actually can't open my eyes. This is really happening.
It provides immediate physical proof to the critical faculty that the process is real.
Exactly.
It's the ultimate buy-in. Once they have that eyelid catalepsy, Elman immediately transitions to step 2, which is known as Vogt fractionation.
Named after the German neurologist Oscar Vogt.
Right. This involves the practitioner repeatedly instructing the subject to open their eyes, look at them, and then close their eyes again, telling them to go twice as deep into relaxation with each single cycle.
The clinical manual attributes the success of this rapid opening and closing to a concept called homoaction.
Homoaction.
Yeah, the tendency of the mind to repeat a known action with greater ease and depth each time. But the critical research plan takes a much deeper neurobiological look at what is physically happening inside the skull.
Right, because intuitively, opening your eyes shouldn't make you more relaxed. Opening your eyes lets the light in, it lets you see the room. It should wake you up and break the trance.
Exactly the opposite happens. What the fractionation is actually doing is causing massive acute metabolic fatigue in the prefrontal cortex.
Metabolic fatigue.
When the eyes open, the brain has to instantly reorient to the waking reality of the room. It has to process the light, the face of the hypnotist, the spatial dimensions.
That makes sense.
That requires a massive spike in executive resources and glucose consumption. Then, a second later, they are told to close their eyes and drop back down into internal processing.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm visualizing this correctly. It's like you're forcing the brain to do mental burpees.
Mental burpees. I love that.
You make it sprint up to full waking awareness, stop, drop back down into deep relaxation, then sprint back up over and over in the span of maybe 30 seconds.
That is a brilliant analogy. Constantly reorienting exhausts the energy reserves of the prefrontal cortex. You have to remember, the brain is fundamentally an energy-conserving organ. It consumes roughly 20% of the body's energy, despite being only 2% of its weight. When the executive function gets metabolically fatigued by this rapid state switching, it simply gives up.
It crashes.
It surrenders to the much less energy-intensive default processing modes. The conscious resistance is literally starved of oxygen and glucose. It becomes too exhausting to fight the hypnotist.
That is incredible. They are physically exhausting the conscious mind's ability to resist by making it work too hard.
Exactly.
After establishing this physical relaxation through the eyes, and then an arm drop test to verify it, Elman moves to step 4, which is mental relaxation.
The famous number block.
Yes, the number block. The subject is told to start counting backward out loud from 100, and with each number they say, they must double their mental relaxation. The suggestion is planted that within a few numbers, perhaps by the time they reach 97, the numbers will just fade away and disappear from their mind completely.
And this is where the profound mental quietude of somnambulism is ultimately achieved.
But wait, let me make sure I understand the mechanics of this, because it sounds like magic.
It does.
So when they get to 97 and the hypnotist says, what's the next number, and the subject just goes blank, they aren't actually forgetting the numbers, right?
No, not at all.
It's not genuine amnesia. Obviously, they still know how to count. They know what comes before 97. Are they actively overloading their own short-term RAM?
Yes. The research plan confirms exactly this mechanism. It is not memory loss in any traditional sense. It is a suggestion-induced suppression of the working memory buffers located in the prefrontal cortex.
Okay.
But it's also acting heavily on Broca's area.
Broca's area is the region in the frontal lobe responsible for expressive language and speech production, right?
Correct. Think about the cognitive load being placed on the subject in that moment.
It's a lot.
The subject is holding a descending numerical sequence in their working memory. Simultaneously, they are being tasked with evaluating and doubling a subjective feeling of physical relaxation. While doing both of those things, they are also verbally articulating the numbers out loud. By adding the final suggestion that the numbers will disappear, the clinician maximizes the cognitive load. The working memory buffer overflows.
It's like when my spouse asks me to remember 3 specific items at the grocery store while a catchy song is playing on the radio and my phone buzzes at the exact same time.
Yep.
My brain just crashes. I walk into the store and my mind is totally blank. I have no idea what I'm supposed to buy.
That is the exact same neurological mechanism, just weaponized for therapy.
Wow.
The working memory buffer overflows, and the suggestion acts as an inhibitory signal to Broca's area. The subject is rendered temporarily aphasic.
Aphasic.
They literally cannot articulate the next number because the language center is jammed. When the numbers vanish and they stop trying to count, the DMN firewall we talked about earlier is fully decoupled. The mind goes completely clear and quiet.
It's just astonishing how mechanical it is.
Very mechanical.
But the Elman induction, brilliant as it is, uses direct compliance. It's
Yeah.
very authoritarian.
It is.
The language is, do this, test that, relax your eyes, make the numbers disappear. It relies heavily on the subject following direct orders to fatigue their own brain.
Right.
But what if the subject is naturally resistant to authority? What if they're analytical, skeptical, and they just don't want to follow direct commands?
That brings us to the methodology that completely revolutionized the field, sitting at the exact opposite end of the spectrum.
Okay.
If Dave Elman is a direct frontal assault on the brain's executive function, Milton Erickson is a master thief picking the lock from the inside without you ever knowing he was there.
Yes, let's talk about the Milton Model and Ericksonian indirect suggestion.
Such a paradigm shift.
Milton Erickson was a psychiatrist who realized that direct commands often trigger what psychologists call reactance, that innate, stubborn human urge to resist being controlled or told what to do.
We all have it.
Right. If I look at you and say, go to sleep right now, your immediate instinct is to widen your eyes and stay awake just to prove you have free will.
Exactly. You can't tell me what to do.
So Erickson developed a covert linguistic system that completely bypasses that conscious resistance.
After Erickson's passing, the founders of neurolinguistic programming, or NLP, deeply studied his transcripts.
Okay.
They analyzed hundreds of hours of his therapy sessions and codified his syntax into what they called the Milton Model. The core objective of this linguistic model is to use artfully vague language.
Artfully vague. I love that term.
It's great.
It sounds like a politician's dream, but used for healing. How does being vague bypass resistance?
By being deliberately ambiguous and leaving crucial details out of a sentence, the practitioner forces the subject's subconscious mind to fill in the missing information using their own internal memories and resources.
Ah, I see.
Because the client is the one generating the specific meaning of the sentence to make sense of it, it becomes hyper-personalized. And more importantly, it becomes impossible for them to resist. You might resist my ideas, but you cannot resist your own ideas.
That is so clever. One of the most famous patterns in the Milton Model is the double bind, or the illusion of choice.
Yes, a classic.
Now, this is different from a pathological double bind that causes psychological distress. The Ericksonian double bind offers 2 distinct choices that both lead to the exact outcome the practitioner wants.
Exactly.
So a hypnotist might say, would you prefer to enter trance now, or keep your eyes open for a few more moments while that comfort spreads?
Let's deconstruct the cognitive mechanics of why that sentence is so devastatingly effective.
Let's do it.
When the conscious mind is presented with a choice now or in a few moments, it satisfies the ego's need for agency and autonomy. The prefrontal cortex evaluates the options and feels like it is in a total control of the situation.
But the underlying presupposition, the fact that you will enter trance, is completely accepted as an undeniable reality.
We don't even question it.
You're so busy choosing when it happens that you forget to question if it should happen at all.
That is the psychological layer. But there is a deeper neurobiological mechanism at play here, which the Phase 2 research plan we are analyzing aims to quantify using functional near-infrared spectroscopy, or fNIR.
Oh.
These double binds work by maximizing cognitive load on the executive control network, the ECN.
Back to cognitive load.
Exactly. When you hear a complex, overlapping sentence structure full of ambiguous clauses, your working memory has to evaluate multiple semantic pathways simultaneously to parse the logic of what is being said.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like a linguistic Trojan horse.
Yes.
The conscious mind, the executive function, is so busy inspecting the shiny wooden horse, trying to figure out the structural logic of the double bind and make a choice, that it doesn't notice the embedded commands sneaking right in through the trapdoor.
That is precisely the mechanism. The working memory's processing capacity is saturated by the complex syntax.
Incredible.
While the ECN is distracted trying to solve the puzzle of the sentence, the embedded command slips completely undetected directly into the implicit processing pathways of the limbic system.
And practitioners use something called analogical marking to highlight those embedded commands, right? Yeah. I've heard audio of Erickson doing this, and his voice constantly shifts in bizarre ways.
Yes, analogical marking is crucial. A practitioner will embed a directive within a larger, completely innocuous sentence, but they will mark that specific directive using a subtle shift in vocal tonality, a drop in volume, a change in tempo, or even a physical gesture.
Right.
So the practitioner might say in a normal conversational tone, I don't know if you will, and then drop their voice slightly and slow down to say, begin to relax deeply, and then return to a normal tone to say, but you can just listen to my voice.
So the conscious mind just hears a conversational statement of uncertainty, I don't know if you will, which lowers its defense.
Right, there's nothing to resist.
But the unconscious mind, which evolutionarily is highly attuned to shifts in tonality and nonverbal cues, extracts the marked phrase, begin to relax deeply, and treats it as an absolute isolated command.
The conscious mind misses the command entirely because it's camouflaged in a broader sentence, but the limbic system receives the directive loud and clear.
It's just brilliant.
They also pair this with a technique called pacing and leading. The clinician will verbally state several undeniable, verifiable sensory truths to build an irresistible rhythm of agreement.
What?
They will say, as you sit in that chair and feel the air in the room and hear the sound of my voice.
Because the brain is verifying those inputs in real time. Yes, I am in the chair. Yes, I feel the air conditioning. Yes, I hear your voice. It's building a massive subconscious yes set.
Once that internal rhythm of truth is established, the clinician seamlessly attaches the therapeutic lead, the suggestion they actually want to implant.
Which is?
You can allow yourself to drift into a deep trance. Because the brain has just verified 3 objective truths in a row, the momentum carries over.
It doesn't even check the fourth one.
Exactly. The brain essentially categorizes the 4th statement as equally true and inevitable without bothering to critically evaluate it.
It's linguistic judo.
Yeah.
It is using the brain's own processing momentum and pattern recognition against it.
It truly is.
But here's a practical question. To know whether to use the direct, authoritative Elman approach or the covert, sneaky Ericksonian approach, a clinician first has to understand the unique neural architecture of the person sitting in front of them.
Right, you need to know who you're dealing with.
How do they know which lockpicking tool to use? And that is where suggestibility testing comes in.
And this is an area where the research manual gets highly critical of standard clinical practice.
Oh.
Traditionally, hypnotists use these tests merely as behavioral sorting tools. Pass or fail. Are you a good subject or a bad subject? But the research plan argues these tests should be viewed as profound neuroanatomical mapping.
Let's look at the classic lemon test.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this right now, maybe don't close your eyes if you're driving.
Yeah.
But I want you to play along.
Yeah, try this.
Picture a perfect, bright yellow lemon. A clinician guides you to visualize the waxy, dimpled rind. Then they tell you to imagine placing it on a wooden cutting board. They tell you to hear the sound of the knife slicing through the skin, to see the juice spray into the air, and smell that sharp citrus scent. Finally, they ask you to imagine picking up a wedge and biting directly into it, feeling that bitter, sour juice wash over your tongue.
Now, on a psychological level, it is an assessment of sensory modality dominance. It helps the clinician determine if a subject is primarily visual, auditory, or kinesthetic in how they process the world.
Right. If you vividly see the lemon but don't taste anything, the hypnotist knows you are highly visual and will use visual metaphors during your session.
Exactly.
If you feel the tartness, you're kinesthetic. But the crazy part is the physiological response. When people do that exercise, they will literally start salivating and swallowing just from imagining a lemon. I'm actually salivating right now just talking about it.
I am too, and this is what the manual points out as being vastly underappreciated by clinicians, that salivary response is not just imagination.
This is physical.
It is a hardwired neurobiological event driven by the superior and inferior salivatory nuclei, which are located in the medulla oblongata down in the brainstem.
Wait, let's translate that. The brainstem is the most primitive part of our brain.
Yeah.
Right? It controls our heart rate, our breathing, our automatic functions.
Exactly.
So what does it mean if someone salivates heavily to this test?
It proves a state of hyperconnectivity between their primary visual cortex V1, located at the back of the brain where the image of the lemon is being generated, and the autonomic regulatory centers in the brainstem.
Wow.
It demonstrates to the clinician that this specific patient has a highly fluid, immediate brain-body connection. Cognitive thoughts in their cerebral cortex instantly trigger autonomic biological responses in their organs.
For you listening, this is incredibly relevant to your everyday life. Understanding your own sensory dominance changes how you process information.
It really does.
If you have that hyperconnectivity, if you salivated at the lemon, it means your body physically reacts to your thoughts much faster and more intensely than other people. If you are stressing about a future event, like visualizing a bad performance review at work next week, your brainstem doesn't know it's a fantasy.
It thinks it's real.
It is already pumping out stress hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, as if the event is happening right now. You are physically living your anxiety.
Which is exhausting.
But on the flip side, it means you have a superpower. You can use that exact same pathway to rapidly downregulate your nervous system using positive visualization.
It is a double-edged sword of neuroplasticity, really. We also see this mind-body translation in ideomotor tests, like the magnetic hands test.
That's one where you hold your hands out in front of you, a few inches apart, and the hypnotist tells you to imagine powerful electromagnets on your palms pulling them together.
Right.
And your hands literally start drifting toward each other on their own in these jerky, robotic movements.
It's demonstrating the physical translation of cognitive suggestions into involuntary motor action. When the subject sees their own hands moving without their conscious effort, it leverages dopamine-driven response expectancy.
A hit of dope.
The brain receives a massive, undeniable dose of proof that this is working. That dopamine hit exponentially increases their compliance for the actual induction that follows.
So far, we have spent a lot of time mapping the descent into standard trance, the realm of somnambulism, where things like pain control, memory manipulation, and negative hallucinations are possible.
The standard stuff, yeah.
But the source documents go much further. They point to these deep, anomalous states that honestly sound like they belong in a science fiction novel. And this highlights the exact gaps that the Phase 3 research plan is desperately trying to solve.
We have to talk about the deeper ends of the Aaron's depth scale. What happens when you push consciousness beyond the boundaries of standard clinical mapping? Because the phenomena get increasingly bizarre.
Let's frame this. The Aaron scale categorizes hypnotic depth into 6 distinct stages. Stages 1 and 2 are just light relaxation. You feel heavy, but you're fully aware. Stage 3 introduces catalepsy and aphasia, like we saw with the eyelids locking or the number block. Stage 4 is where amnesia and analgesia begin. You can forget your name or tolerate a needle poke.
Right.
Stage 5 is somnambulism, where you can have positive hallucinations, meaning you see or hear things that aren't actually in the room.
Like a hallucinated dog or something.
Exactly. And stage 6 is profound somnambulism, featuring negative hallucinations, meaning you fail to perceive things that do exist, like not seeing a person standing right in front of you and total surgical anesthesia.
It's profound.
But then the clinical manual ventures into what they call ultra-depth paradigms. Let's talk about the Esdale state.
The Esdale state, often referred to as hypnotic coma, is named after James Esdale. He was a Scottish surgeon who famously performed hundreds of major painless surgeries in India in the 1840s.
Before modern anesthesia.
Well, before chemical anesthesia like ether or chloroform was available. Phenomenologically, the state is characterized by profound euphoria and spontaneous whole-body anesthesia that occurs completely naturally. Yeah, without any direct verbal suggestion from the hypnotist regarding pain control, it just happens as a byproduct of the depth.
The physical markers of someone in the estale state are so bizarre. The subject exhibits this waxy pre-catatonic catalepsy. Let me paint a picture of this.
Please do.
If the hypnotist walks over to a person in the estale state and lifts their arm straight up into the air, it just locks into place. It stays suspended in space, completely effortlessly, like posing a wax mannequin.
Just frozen.
And usually the subject will completely ignore the hypnotist. If you ask them a question, they won't answer because the internal state is supposedly so euphoric, they simply don't want to expend the energy to move their mouth or be bothered by the outside world.
What's fascinating here is the massive scientific ambiguity surrounding this state. The research manual effectively throws up its hands and demands to know what is the electroencephalographic, the EEG, definition of this.
What's the brain doing electrically?
Exactly. Is it a variant of slow-wave delta sleep, like when you are in your deepest dreamless slumber? Or is it a fully awake state where the periaqueductal gray in the midbrain is suddenly sending massive descending inhibitory signals to block all spinal nociceptors?
Meaning, is the brain actively blocking all pain signals at the spine while the person is fully conscious?
Yes. And what about that waxy catalepsy?
Yeah, because I go to the gym, and if I hold my arm out in front of me for 3 minutes, my shoulder burns. How is an arm floating in the air for 20 minutes without the person experiencing agonizing muscle fatigue?
That is one of the great mysteries the audit highlights. What is physically occurring at the neuromuscular junction? Is there an involuntary sustained release of acetylcholine?
That's the neurotransmitter that causes muscles to contract, right?
Yes. Is it maintaining that muscle tone without the motor cortex in the brain actively firing? We genuinely don't know.
Wow.
Until we put someone in a verified Esdale state into an EMG to measure the electrical activity of the muscles and an fMRI simultaneously, it remains a clinical anecdote rather than a mapped, understood neurological state.
And if you thought that was weird, it gets even deeper. The manual describes something called the Psychort state, discovered by a hypnotist named Walter Psychort.
The Psychort state.
Proponents claim this is an ultra-depth state characterized by an absolute 100% absence of residual muscular tension. You are essentially a puddle on the floor.
Complete relaxation.
But the wild part is that they claim it is a waking REM state rapid eye movement that facilitates massive time distortion and rapid physical regeneration. Yet the subject can still hear and respond to the hypnotist.
This claim raises a massive red flag for the neuroscientists auditing the manual because a waking REM state fundamentally defies standard human sleep architecture.
Wait, pontigenicular what? I'm reading ahead in the notes here. Pontigenicular occipital waves. Let's translate that for the rest of us. Are you saying the brain has a specific chemical trigger to start dreaming, and somehow this state bypasses it?
Exactly. Normally when you sleep, you cycle through stages. REM sleep, where you dream and your eyes dart around beneath your lids, is triggered by very specific electrical bursts called PGO waves, pontigenicular occipital waves that originate deep in the brainstem.
Okay.
If a subject is supposedly in REM while fully awake, conscious, and responsive to a therapist, how on earth are PGO waves being initiated outside of a normal sleep cycle?
It shouldn't be possible.
The manual points out there is zero polysomnographic evidence for this. No sleep studies have validated a waking REM state. It is neurologically anomalous.
It sounds like we're drifting away from hard science and into the realm of magic.
It really does.
Which brings us to the absolute most controversial part of the clinical manual, the Simpson protocol.
Oh, the Simpson protocol.
This protocol was designed specifically to communicate with a client who is down in the Esdale state. Because remember, in Esdale, they are so euphoric they refuse to speak.
Right, they won't talk.
So the practitioner uses ideomotor finger signaling. They establish a system where the client unconsciously lifts their index finger for yes and their pinky for no to communicate directly with what the protocol calls the superconscious.
And this is where the critical research plan draws a hard, unforgiving line. The term superconscious is a mystical, esoteric construct.
That sounds very spiritual.
It sounds great in a spiritual workshop, but it is entirely divorced from cognitive neuroscience.
Wait, let me just make sure I am grasping the full absurdity of what is being claimed here.
Go for it.
Someone is supposedly in a waking REM state, feeling absolutely zero physical pain. Their arm is floating in the air like a ghost, and their fingers are twitching on their own to communicate with a magical entity called the superconscious to execute content-free trauma healing.
That's the claim.
That sounds like we are drifting right back to the 18th century with Franz Mesmer and animal magnetism. What is the actual biological reality here? Surely it isn't a higher power moving their finger.
That is exactly what the Phase 3 research plan aims to aggressively deconstruct. The neuroscientific hypothesis is that the superconscious is not a magical higher power. It is simply a misunderstanding of the brain's implicit, non-declarative memory network.
Okay, let's break that down because I think a lot of people don't realize we have different types of memory systems running simultaneously. What is implicit memory? Is it like muscle memory, like how I can type on a keyboard without thinking about where the keys are, but applied to emotional trauma?
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it. Your declarative memory is the stuff you can consciously recall and talk about facts, dates, the story of what happened on your 10th birthday.
Right.
But implicit memory is unconscious. It stores motor skills, habits, and incredibly deep emotional conditioning. This implicit system is largely housed in older, deeper areas of the brain, like the basal ganglia and the cerebellum.
Okay, the basal ganglia.
The theory put forward by the researchers is that when the prefrontal cortex, the conscious talking mind, is completely decoupled and silenced in these ultra-deep states, the clinician can use finger signaling to directly interface with the basal ganglia.
So the finger twitch isn't the soul talk, it is the basal ganglia executing a motor response based on the emotional valence of a hidden memory.
Precisely. The brain is evaluating a traumatic event implicitly. The therapist asks a question, and the basal ganglia signals yes or no regarding its resolution, without the conscious mind ever having to re-experience or articulate the specific, terrifying details of the memory.
That is fascinating.
It strips all the mystical terminology away and grounds this miraculous-seeming healing in non-declarative motor responses.
That makes so much more sense. And honestly, it makes it even more incredible because it's real biology. It's the brain healing itself through alternate pathways. But this brings us to a crucial dividing line in our sources. Up until this point, we've been talking entirely about hypnosis as a transient temporary state. You induce it, you alter the brain networks for 45 minutes, you do the therapy, you wake them up, and their brain networks recouple.
Right, it's acute.
But what happens when altered states are maintained longitudinally? When you do this every single day? This is where we bridge the gap between clinical hypnosis and secular meditation.
This is perhaps the most profound gap identified in the research manual, the divide between functional transience, changing how the brain fires in the moment, and structural plasticity, changing the actual physical hardware of the brain over time.
Let's look at Sarah Lazar's groundbreaking research at Harvard. She didn't study acute hypnosis. She studied long-term meditators, specifically people going through John Kabat-Zinn's 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction program, or MBSR.
To contrast the imaging techniques, while David Spiegel used fMRI to look at the real-time functional flow of blood and energy during a hypnotic trance, Sarah Lazar used MRI and a technique called voxel-based morphometry to look at the structural physical hardware of the brain before and after 8 weeks of meditation.
Wait, voxel-based, let's break that down for a second. What is a voxel?
A voxel is essentially a three-dimensional pixel. When you take an MRI scan of the brain, the computer divides the image into millions of tiny 3D cubes, or voxels.
Okay, 3D pixels.
By measuring the density of the gray matter within each of those microscopic cubes before and after the 8-week program, Lazar could see if specific areas of the brain had physically grown or shrunk.
And what she found was neuroplasticity in action. She proved that meditation literally changes the physical density of your brain.
Yeah.
It's not just a mindset shift, it's a structural remodel.
The voxel-based morphometry showed increased cortical thickness in several key areas. First, the prefrontal cortex, which we know is the seat of executive function. Second, the right anterior insula, which handles that interoceptive somatic awareness we discussed earlier.
Body-brain connection.
Third, the temporoparietal junction, or TTJ, which is highly associated with empathy and perspective taking. And finally, the left hippocampus, which is crucial for learning, memory consolidation, and emotional regulation.
Basically, all the hardware associated with being a grounded, emotionally intelligent, highly functioning human gets structurally upgraded. It gets thicker, more gray matter, more processing power.
Exactly.
But what shrinks? What loses volume?
The amygdala, the almond-shaped structure deep in the temporal lobe that acts as your primary threat detection and fear processing center.
The panic button.
The brains of the MDSR participants showed a measurable decrease in gray matter density in the amygdala. It physically shrank, and this structural shrinkage directly correlated with their self-reported reductions in stress and the physical downregulation of their fight-or-flight response.
So let's synthesize this. David Spiegel shows that hypnosis can functionally decouple the anxiety networks in a matter of minutes.
Right.
Sarah Lazar shows that meditation can structurally shrink the fear center over a matter of weeks. Both modalities are operating on the exact same neural territories. The insula, the prefrontal cortex, the default mode network.
And yet, as the research plan heavily points out, the academic literature treats them as entirely separate disciplines.
Which is strange.
The missing synthesis is this. If a clinician uses routine clinical hypnosis on a patient over a prolonged period, say, twice a week for 2 months, does it produce the exact same structural neurogenesis and cortical thickening as meditation?
Wow.
Does acute network decoupling eventually lead to permanent structural wiring?
It's the difference between software and hardware. Hypnosis is installing a new software patch to fix a bug in your anxiety program right now. Meditation is slowly upgrading the RAM and the motherboard over time so the system runs better overall.
That's a great analogy.
But the question is, what if the software patch, run enough times, eventually alters the motherboard?
That is the exact hypothesis of the phase longitudinal study proposed in our source document. They want to validate if hypnotherapy can be used not just as a behavioral tool to stop smoking, but as a neurorehabilitative tool to physically rebuild brains damaged by trauma.
But altering these networks, especially when dealing with severe trauma, is not a game. It is not without severe risks. The clinical manual spends significant time detailing the acute management of therapeutic abreactions.
Yes. An abreaction is a sudden, intense, and often chaotic release of repressed emotion during a session.
It can be scary.
Sometimes this is a necessary and highly cathartic release. The pressure valve pops off. But it can easily tip into a malignant abreaction where the patient loses their grounding and is actively re-traumatized by experiencing memory.
And the research manual critiques the clinical guide for only describing the psychological management of this, telling the therapist what to say to calm them down. It completely ignores the neurochemical tipping point, what is actually happening in the brain during a malignant abreaction.
It is a profound neurobiological crisis. When a severe trauma is accessed, the brain can trigger an acute, massive spike in norepinephrine and cortisol. These are your primary stress hormones.
Okay.
If this chemical flood overwhelms the parasympathetic buffering system, which relies on the calming neurotransmitter acetylcholine to keep the heart rate down, the amygdala essentially hijacks the prefrontal cortex.
The fear center kicks down the door and takes over the CEO's office.
Exactly.
The patient loses what therapists call their observing ego. They are no longer a 40-year-old adult sitting in a safe, quiet therapy room remembering a trauma that happened 20 years ago. Biologically, their brain thinks they are back in the trauma is happening to them right now.
Which is exactly why clinicians must be able to halt this neurochemical cascade instantly before the brain cements the trauma further.
Right.
The manual outlines several grounding techniques, but the most prominent and effective is the Betty Erickson 3-2-1 technique.
This was developed by Betty Erickson, Milton Erickson's wife, and a brilliant collaborator in her own right. It is an incredibly powerful self-regulation protocol.
Highly effective.
And honestly, for you listening, if you take absolutely nothing else away from this hour-long deep dive, learn this technique. It is a primary, evidence-based intervention that anyone can use to pull their nervous system out of a panic attack.
The mechanics of it are deeply tied to everything we've discussed today regarding working memory, cognitive load, and the Elman induction.
Here is how you do it. Let's walk through it together. If you feel yourself escalating into a panic or a trauma response, or even if you're just lying in bed with severe insomnia and your mind won't stop racing, you open your eyes and look around the room.
Okay.
You explicitly name 3 things you can see, 3 things you can hear, and 3 things you can physically feel.
For example, I see the lamp on the desk, I see the doorknob, I see the window frame, I hear the hum of the air conditioner, I hear a car driving by outside, I hear the sound of my own breath, I feel my feet flat on the floor, I feel the fabric of my cotton shirt against my arm, I feel the weight of my watch on my wrist.
Then you immediately repeat the cycle, but you drop the number to 2. 2 things you see, 2 things you hear, 2 things you feel, and then finally 1 of each.
Right.
So why does this deceptively simple game stop a full-blown panic attack? What is the biological why?
It is the deliberate, systematic taxation of working memory capacity.
Taxation of memory.
By forcing your prefrontal cortex to rapidly scan the external environment, identify distinct sensory inputs across 3 different modalities, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and then verbally articulate them, you are maximizing your cognitive load. You are entirely filling the RAM.
You are crowding out the intrusive traumatic memories. There is simply no processing power left to run the panic software. The brain can't process the fear of tomorrow because it's too busy cataloging the hum of the air conditioner today.
But more importantly than just distraction, you are flooding the amygdala with mundane, non-threatening sensory data. During a panic attack, the amygdala is screaming that there is a tiger in the room. And you are forcing it to process a lamp, an air conditioner, and a cotton shirt.
It realizes there's no tiger.
This massive influx of boring, safe data signals the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which controls your stress response that the external environment is currently secure.
Yeah.
It rapidly suppresses the limbic hyperarousal.
It physically halts the cortisol spike. And the funneling down from 3 to 2 to 1 naturally drives your external focus inward, inducing a naturalistic, calming trance state.
Yes.
So what does this all mean? It means you have a manual override switch for your own autonomic nervous system.
It perfectly bridges everything we've discussed today. It uses the cognitive overlay principle of the Dave Elman Induction, combined with the sensory pacing and leading of the Milton Model to achieve the neurochemical downregulation seen in MBSR meditation.
All synthesized into a tool you can use while sitting at your desk or lying in bed.
It's so accessible.
It is so empowering to know that you can seize control of the hardware. We have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
We started by throwing out the swinging pocket watches and the idea that hypnosis is just a stage trick. We looked at David Spiegel's fMRI data to prove that trance is a measurable biological state where the threat radar in the DACC goes offline, the executive brain connects directly to the body to shut off pain, and the ego's firewall, the default mode network, is entirely unplugged.
We deconstructed how inductions actually work. How Dave Elman used physical tests like eyelid catalepsy and rapid eye fractionation to cause acute metabolic fatigue, literally exhausting the prefrontal cortex into surrendering control. We saw how making someone count backward isn't magic. It's inducing aphasia by overloading the working memory and suppressing Broca's language area.
We looked at Milton Erickson's linguistic Trojan horses, how double binds and artfully vague language distract the executive control network just long enough to slip therapeutic commands straight into the limbic system.
Linguistic judo.
Yes. We explored how the lemon test maps your visual to brainstem connectivity, proving that your thoughts instantly dictate your biological reality.
And we ventured into the ultra-deep waters of the Esdale and Secord states, examining how the Simpson protocol bypasses the conscious mind entirely to let the basal ganglia process trauma through implicit ideomotor finger signals.
Yeah, that was why.
Finally, we looked at how acute functional network changes might, over time, lead to the permanent structural neuroplasticity seen in Sarah Lazar's meditation research, and how you can hack that system yourself with the 3-2-1 technique.
The ultimate takeaway here is that human consciousness is not a rigid, fixed entity. You are not stuck the way you are.
No, absolutely not.
Your mind is highly fluid, and its physical networks can be targeted, manipulated, and rebuilt, which leads us to a final thought for you to take with you today.
If our executive function, our critical faculty, and our very sense of self can be so easily decoupled, hijacked, or overwritten by specific linguistic patterns, cognitive overload, or simply pacing our sensory reality, it raises a profound question.
What's that?
How much of our everyday waking reality is actually objective? Or are we mostly just walking around in an unhypnotized default mode, running our old, unexamined conditioning, just waiting for the right script to fundamentally change who we are?
If the brain is really just an organic machine waiting for the right inputs to rewrite its own code, maybe it's time we start paying very close attention to the language we use, the media we consume, and the compliance loops we willingly engage in every single day. The keyboard is always active. The question is, who is writing your code? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, and we'll see you next time.